let me start off with Claire. She is an attorney with extensive public policy experience. Claire was most recently the policy before the Pennsylvania Prison Society, served as the policy and research director for the national campaign to reform state juvenile justice systems. This is a Washington-based advocacy organization, works on improving juvenile justice laws around the country. Previously, she worked at this little organization I work at, the Pew Charitable Trusts, where she oversaw a series of studies facing Philadelphia, including municipal budgeting, the free library, and the overuse of incarceration. Claire taught also as an adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon's Heinz College of Public Policy, Pittsburgh. And she was an investigator for the New York City Civilian Complaints Review Board, where she investigated allegations of police misconduct. And she's a graduate of Vassar College and a Boston University School of Law. And she was a former clerk to a U.S. District Court Underhill, Justice Underhill. David Robinson, he was elected and began his term this year as president, as I said, of AFSCME District Council 33, Local 159, represents about 1,500 correctional officer positions and officers serving under the Philadelphia Department of Prisons 4 facilities, housing altogether capacity up to 4,600. Actually, maybe that's the latest census, 4,600 individuals as of last summer. Before leading the union, David was a sergeant himself in the Youthful Offenders Program, and previously he served as a correctional officer at Riverside Correctional Facility, at the Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center, and at the House of Corrections. We're going to start with Claire. She has some slides. I'm going to pull them up. And Claire, why don't you start off, and when you signal, I will share the slides, and we'll go from there. Oh, and I'm sorry, everybody, one more thing. As you know, what we do with these, please put your comments or questions into the chat in your screen, and I'm moderating it, so I will be looking over those, and we will be either reading those to the panelists after they finish their presentations, or if you want to mention yourself or talk about it, just put that in the chat so you would like to ask your own question, and I will unmute you to do that. Again, so Claire's going to start for about 15 minutes, then David, and then we'll go to the Q&A. All good?
Thank you, Tom. Can you put up the first slide?
Yep.
Great. Thank you all for being here. Tom, thank you for inviting me. I think as Tom, you may have guessed from Tom's introduction, Tom is a friend from when we were colleagues at Pew together. So I'm just gonna, I think because
Are you seeing it yet? Are you seeing it yet?
Yeah, you don't have it in the slideshow format, which would be a little better, but you do have it up on your screen.
I'm doing that now.
Great.
Worked?
I see it in a weird kind of way, but I can see it. I don't know about the other people.
Never mind. I'm fixing that too. Sorry. All right. Better?
Great. So I'm mainly seeing names. I'm seeing about 7 or 8 names. And Nancy, it's nice to see your face. Tom, I see you. So I'm just going to sort of pretend like I'm talking to Tom and Nancy and assume all the other names are listening. And here's what I've sort of thought to, oh, now Nancy's blank too. So I'm just going to talk to you, Tom. Here's what I've sort of outlined for myself to talk about, and you can move me along as needed. Yeah. You know, I want to give you a little background on what is the Prison Society, sort of why are we the organization to talk to this issue? What are the Philadelphia prisons? Because though David knows them more intimately than I do, I'm assuming most of you are not familiar with them. What is happening that makes this a topic in dire need of attention right now, and what needs to be done? So that's how I've sort of organized my remarks for you. So what is the Prison Society? For those of you that don't know, We're the oldest human rights organization in the country. We were founded in 1787 by Benjamin Rush and Benjamin Franklin and about 40 of our nation's and our city's founders, who believed that, or I should say, who recognized that people who are incarcerated are there not only for crimes, but also for follies. That's the language of the Prison Society's Constitution from 1787, recognizes that our fellow creatures in prison who are there because of their follies and crimes are not exempt from the duties of benevolence, and that the purpose of the prison society and really of corrections in the new democracy is to restore our fellow creatures to lives of virtue and happiness. That's the Prison Society's Constitution, written 3 months before the start of the Constitutional Convention, and we carry that forward 234 years later. In 1828, we were written into state law as having the authority to enter into every correctional facility in the Commonwealth for the purposes of visiting and privately interviewing anybody in custody. So today, we enter into all 62 county and 23 state facilities in the Commonwealth, housing a total of 63,000 Pennsylvanians, just shy of 1% of the adult population. And we go in for 2 reasons. One is to monitor prison conditions. And then another is to provide social supports to people in these truly isolating situations. We serve as the Commonwealth's de facto ombuds and monitor for prisons. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that we do this almost entirely with charitable donations. Back in 1787, we were started with charitable donations from Rush and Franklin and their colleagues, and we operate today on charitable donations. So if you, like our founders, believe that prisons in the Commonwealth should be humane places that attempt to restore our fellow creatures to lives of virtue and happiness, let me encourage you to join in the legacy of the founders and fund the Prison Society. So what are the Philadelphia prisons? You see a picture of the largest facility on your screen, and I think that's the entrance to the visiting rooms. So there's a campus in North Philadelphia off of State Road behind some brown stone walls, not far from the Four Seasons landscaping business. A campus that comprises several buildings, 5 of which currently house incarcerated people in the custody of the city of Philadelphia. Today, the buildings house just shy of 4,700 Philadelphians. So who are the 4,700 Philadelphians that are presently in the custody of the city? Some of these people have been convicted of crimes and are serving sentences of 2 years or less. If you're convicted of a crime and you're serving a longer sentence, you are sent to one of the 23 state correctional institutions, anywhere from 8 hours away from Philadelphia over in Erie to, 45 minutes without traffic in Montgomery County. Some of the people, that these 4,700 people, are awaiting trial and are being held while their trial proceeds, their court cases proceed. And some of the people in custody, actually a surprising large number of the people in custody, are people who were sentenced to community supervision, either probation or parole, but then were accused of doing something while on community supervision that landed them back in custody. And that can be anything from not calling their probation officer when they were supposed to, not showing up for a meeting at the right time, not getting a job in the time that they were supposed to get a job, continuing to be an alcoholic when their community supervision's term said suddenly stop being an alcoholic, to being accused of a new crime. And that you can be locked up again for being accused of shoplifting, something that otherwise wouldn't get you incarcerated, but if you're on community supervision and you shoplift, bam, you're incarcerated, to even the most horrific crimes. So again, that's who these 4,700 people, why they're in the jail. They're either sentenced, awaiting trial, or they were on community supervision and were reincarcerated. Okay, so why are we talking about these people today? Why did Tom ask me to talk today? What's happening in these 5 facilities? Well, death and violence is what's happening in these facilities to an extraordinary and unusual degree in the past year. And I'm not talking about death from COVID. So in this year alone, in 2021 to date, there have been 14 deaths, including 3 homicides, 3 suicides, and 3 overdoses. Tom, can you move to the next slide?
Yep.
In comparison, from 2012 to 2018, Philadelphia, you only see the homicides here. But from 2012 to 2018, just to put this in context, the Philadelphia prisons averaged 12 deaths a year, and the census during that time period was more around 6,000. So we had more people in jail and less death. We averaged from 2012 to 2018, 0.3 homicides a year and 0.2 suicides a year. And again, this year we've had 3 homicides and 3 suicides. In the next slide, I'm going to put this in a broader context. Next slide, please. So in New York City, a city 6 times the size of Philadelphia, with 3 times as many people in their jail custody, they have had the exact same number of fatalities this year in their prison. And it has been such a crisis that they're having this number of fatalities in prison that the governor of New York has gotten very directly involved. So what I want to say is the crisis in Philadelphia, and I'm only showing you the numbers of deaths because the city doesn't publish the numbers of assaults. But as David will talk to you about, the number of assaults anecdotally is much, much higher this year than in previous years in Philadelphia. And those numbers just aren't published. And that's not only assaults between people in custody, but that's also assaults on staff. Today, State Road in Philadelphia is a very dangerous place to be confined and a very dangerous place to work, to a degree that it was not a year ago, that it has not been in any recent memory. It is more dangerous now than the infamous Rikers Island. And, you know, one of the things that I really bristle at is that the mayor's spokeswoman, when another person dies in Philadelphia, and I predict in the prisons, and I predict another person will die before the end of this year, the mayor's spokeswoman says, well, this is a national problem. It's happening everywhere. It's happening at Rikers. Let me point out, it is much worse in Philadelphia than it is in New York, and New York is treating it like a crisis. And let me also say, we monitor conditions in all 62 county facilities across the Commonwealth, and we are not seeing this in any other county in the Commonwealth, with one exception, which is, although they are not having the fatalities that we see here in Philadelphia, we suspect, although we do not have good data, that the violence in the Delaware County Jail may be similar to what we're seeing here in Philadelphia. And if anybody is from Delco, I can talk about that. Likely you are not. So what are the problems resulting in this crisis? Or the problems that are causing this crisis? So, and what can be done to resolve it? So here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is the problems that have, and bad news is that the problems that have resulted in this crisis are completely of government actors making and can be completely solved through government action. So compared to the gun violence crisis facing the city of Philadelphia or the opioid epidemic, Those are crises that are the result of societal factors, and they may be exacerbated by government action or inaction. This crisis, the 14 deaths, the uncounted assaults, is completely of the making of government and can be completely solved by government. What makes it a tricky crisis to solve is that the problems that have led us here span all three branches of government and both county and state layers of government. So there's not one actor and one solution and a silver bullet. There are a bunch of different actors and different solutions. And that's why we at the Prison Society for months have been calling on the state and the county to appoint a crisis manager to take leadership to solve this interbranch crisis. And I'll now talk about what those problems are and how the different branches are involved. Broadly put, you can think about the problems that have led to these deaths and violence as falling into three categories: staff shortages, poor management, and too many people at the jail, too many people in custody. So staffing, management, and census. And I'll break those down in part. Next slide, Tom.
I'm getting there. All right.
So while the number of people in custody has remained largely unchanged since 2019, by the way, the number of people in custody was almost double before Larry Krasner became district attorney. But since Krasner's ascendancy, the census has remained fairly unchanged. At the same time, the number of staff has declined precipitously. So currently, what you see in front of you is the census and the number of staff vacancies. Now, I want to say that in almost every county jail in the Commonwealth, there are vacancies now. The labor shortage has impacted prisons, and hiring new staff is a problem in almost every county in the Commonwealth, but not to the degree that you see here in Philadelphia. Tom, next slide. And I want to thank Rebecca Reinhardt's office for these slides. So this slide was created in the beginning of September, and you see that at the beginning of September, there were 479 vacancies, unfilled positions with the Department of Prisons. Today, that number is higher. It's now 520. And this is out of a full staffing complement of 1,884. So in other words, the Department of Prisons is short-staffed by close to a third. And so you simply don't have enough people to supervise the number of people in custody. So that's why people can kill each other. It should be impossible to be able to kill someone in a closely supervised environment like a jail. It should be impossible to kill yourself in a closely supervised environment like a jail. And in most years, as you saw, that's true in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has typically had a decently managed prison, but that has not been true this past year. We've been going into the prison as part of our responsibility as the independent ombuds and monitor. And I want to just paint a picture for you of a little bit of what I'm seeing. During the pandemic, and because of the staffing shortages, people in custody, Philadelphians in custody, are confined to their cells 24, 48, 72 hours a day. So imagine yourself in a small office cubicle with a roommate you've never met before, no way to get out, and nothing to do. I think you'd go crazy. I would go crazy. And our fellow citizens who are incarcerated are going crazy. When I say nothing to do, I mean nothing to do. So let me give you an example. In most county facilities and in state facilities, people are given reading materials. People are given these sort of clunky tablets for a few hours a day that have restricted reading material and games on them. In the state facilities, people have access to televisions. In Philadelphia, you have none of that. You are in a facility, you are in a box with a roommate with nothing to do. And I'm going to give you two little vignettes that I think really highlight this for me. When we first went into the facilities in June, we went into the facility I showed you a picture of, and we were walking around. We were going into any part of the facility we wanted to, as is our statutory right. And the staff that were accompanying us were having us look into the housing units from the glass windows that you can see into them from the hallway. And we asked if we could please go on to a housing unit. And the staff that was with us said, we don't want you going into a housing unit because the people in custody are so unaccustomed to seeing another human being that if they see another human being on the housing unit, there will be massive disruption. So we said, no, please, we wish to go onto a housing unit. We will be quick. We will not be disruptive. So we were led into a housing unit. When we entered into the housing unit, and this is a unit that has probably about 70 cells. Can I wind up soon? Yes. Has about 70 cells, each housing 2 men. When we entered into this unit with over 100 men, it was library quiet. We had been on this unit for about 30 seconds before one man got up from his cell and saw us. And suddenly everyone was screaming and banging. And what were they screaming for? They wanted to call their families. They wanted to see their mothers. They wanted a family visit. They wanted their families to know where they were. I then mentioned that this is an issue of staffing and management. So by court order, people in custody are supposed to be let out for a minimum of 3 hours a day from their cells. But as the Prison Society has seen in every facility that we've been to, the prison does not keep track of who's getting let out of their cells. So while one group of cells may be let out every day for 3 hours, another group of cells on a housing unit may not be let out for several days. And no one's keeping track of who's getting let out or when. No one has reading material or any material to pass the time. Some men we spoke to on our first visit talked about one correctional officer who on her own dime had copied the crossword from the Inquirer and how that had been their only reading material for a week and it meant so much to them. So we at the Prison Society bought puzzle books for all of the men housed at the largest facility. The prison was unable to distribute those books because of poor management. Now I'm just going to talk about the last problem, and then we can talk about solutions elsewhere, which is census. So I've talked about how this is a staffing problem, a management problem, and now I just want to talk about how it's a problem of census. A prison you can analogize to a grocery store. The number of items on a shelf are a function of how many items get put on the shelf and how many items get taken off the shelf. Under Larry Krasner's leadership, the number of items, the number of people getting put into the facility has gone down. But under the pandemic, the number of people being released out of the facility has slowed to a grinding halt. This is a function of the court. This is a function of the State Department of Corrections transporting people that will enter their custody. This is a function of county and state probation and parole officers not answering the phone to say when somebody under community supervision can be released. And this is largely why this is not just a problem for the city. This is also a problem for the state. And it is not just a problem for the Kenney administration, the executive branch, but it is also a problem of the courts, which is why, yet again, the Prison Society calls for the appointment of an intergovernmental crisis manager to stop the deaths, to stop the killings. And, you know, my heart goes out to David and to his colleagues who are asked into these dangerous, dangerous facilities every day.
All right. Thank you, Claire. Let me, you guys can hear me okay. David, you're up. I'm going to actually, should I keep, David, do you want me to keep the slide up or would you like me to? Maybe I'll keep it up since you're just on the phone anyway. Is that all right?
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, you can keep it up, even though I can't see it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much fluent in it, and I know exactly. I recognize the slides from Rebecca Reinhardt. I want to thank her office for that.
They are the same.
You can definitely keep the slides up because I know exactly what Claire is talking about. And just from the beginning, you said I represent 1,500 correctional officers, and of course, we're down, and it's sad to say we're about at 1,100 as of today. And the crisis that's going on, we're losing more and more each day because we scheduled to lose five officers a day. And those officers, they're just walking away from careers that they had for 10, 20, some almost 30 years. Some retirement, some resign, some just said, I can't take it anymore. And we just have to come up with a solution as to why this is happening. And to Claire's point, yes, it's been poor management, short staffing, the courts, they're all involved. So now we have to figure out how we're going to fix this problem. I've come up with several solutions to the department, suggesting how inmates can be out with their regular amount of time. And in the beginning, it wasn't heard, it went on deaf ears. Now that we're having all these riots and situations just popping up out of nowhere, they're taking a look at it. And it shouldn't have took riots to happen, inmates deaths to happen for this to occur. Because we've been talking about this since March when I first was elected. But prior to that, just being a sergeant inside these facilities, it's not the same anymore. It's completely unsafe. Sad to say, someone will be killed, whether it's staff or inmate. Someone, of course, as we know, inmates have been killed. But now we're coming up to the point where we don't know if staff will be killed. And as Claire said, the assaults are up tremendously on staff and inmates. And when you lock people in for so long, it messes with their mind. So this trickles out to the community as well. And as you can see, the state of this city it's horrible. It's completely unsafe. And these are the same individuals that are in and out of the prison system. But when you're locked in all day, you have nothing else to do, nothing to think about. It disturbs your mental. Of course, with the staff, you have correctional officers that work 20 to 21 hours. Some done 24 hours. And that's a part of management. How can you have an officer on duty for over 20 hours and expect that officer to come back the next day and start all over again and work effectively? It's impossible. That's why, hopefully with the city's help, we need solutions. And of course, you can hire, and you can hire. But these cadets, as soon as they get into these facilities, they're quitting. We just lost, I believe, 2 from the last class that just graduated last week because they signed up to work inside of a prison. Of course, everybody knows prisons aren't safe. However, they should be ran effectively. They sign up to work as correctional officers inside of the institution, but they haven't signed up to work under those conditions in which they're working. That's the problem that we're having today. And if we can just be onboarding people, they will lose them just as fast. Right now, currently, State Road has 1 active warden. 1. That means there's no one to there effectively manage the facilities. The administration, they're just taking it upon themselves to act as if they're warding the facilities. However, they can't fully function their jobs. So now they're doing dual roles. I don't know if it's because of city budgets or anything like that they didn't hire because they have several people on the warden list. Or I don't know what the plan is that the administration has for the prisons in the future. But I do know it's a problem. And something has to be done. Just recently, they asked retirees to come back to work inside the prisons. They sent out hundreds of letters, and they had 6 responses. And the ones who declined said they will never go back in there because of the conditions that they're working under, and it's unsafe. And we don't want to have a situation where Delaware had an officer that was killed inside of the facility. I don't want any of my members having a jail named after them because they were murdered. And that's exactly how CFCF was made, current farmhold, because of an uprising in Holmesburg. And now with the recent riots at Kick, the standoffs at RCF, we don't know what's going to happen next. And it's not safe because currently it's almost 5,000 incarcerated individuals. There are only 1,100 active correctional staff. So, of course, we can do the math. That's not safe. To where we used to have almost 2,300 correctional staff. And it's because of management. It's not being ran correctly. And I think the city should step in and take notice of how it's being ran instead of just ignoring the issue. Because I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to city council, I've talked to 1 million people that will listen. The air quality is supposed to be checked. That hasn't happened. I went on tour at RCF. I couldn't even go on the units because the major wouldn't allow me because of the smoke. Now, RCF it's a newer facility that used to house the women, now it houses the men. But they have a system when it's in, like, whether a sprinkler pops or smoke is in the air, the doors and the corridor will close. So as I was walking, the doors were closed. So I thought, okay, I just was recently at that facility as a sergeant back in March. And usually when that happens, an inmate probably popped a sprinkler and it's a flood. So I said, okay, somebody popped a sprinkler. But the agent said, no, actually it's because of the smoke. That same smoke that's being smoked by inmates, K2, they're getting it through the mail. So I suggested to the commissioner and her team that they take the original mail, make a copy of it, give the inmates a copy, and put the original in their property. That has yet to happen. And we all know we have intelligence inside and outside. So we know how it's happening and how the inmates are actually getting most of the K2. Of course, we know we have contract staff and staff that can be compromised. But for the most part, it's coming through the mail. So to stop a problem, you say, you know what, you're right, let's take this into consideration. But it's not happening. And now my members, as well as inmates, the ones who aren't partaking in this type of lifestyle with smoking, whatever they smoke, they have to suffer through that. So if you're a correctional officer on a unit for 8, 16, 12, 20 hours, you're going to feel like you're intoxicated. I had to follow an officer home a few months ago who was swerving. At first, I didn't know who it was, and I pulled up on him. He was sweating, water beating down his face, drinking a water bottle. I'm like, what's going on? When I finally got the chance to talk to him, he said, I think I'm high. This man doesn't do drugs that I know of. And he told me he doesn't drink or smoke. But he works on a unit where they say, okay, if you have smoke, call the shift commander, which is the captain and above, and they'll call maintenance to get an air evacuation. And that's supposed to reverse the air, but that doesn't work. That officer just recently quit. That's how bad it's going on. That's the problem that we're having, because everyone is ignoring the main issues. You have inmates being killed because of short staffing. There's no one on these units. And just like Claire said, when she went to go on tour, it was quiet for a second. When they seen visitors, they went crazy. And that's what happens when I go on tour too, because yes, I do represent the correctional officers. However, I do have a heart as well, so I do talk to the inmates. And some of them say, thank you, Rob. They call me Rob because we go by last names. But they say, thank you, Rob, for putting it out there, what's going on. And, these conditions are horrible. And I understand how they feel because, like I said, this is not the same department that I worked in just months ago. I seen it coming when they started switching around. During the pandemic, they switched the detention center over to RCF, moved the women out of RCF into ASD, and it went downhill from there. Because COVID was just running rampant through the entire facilities. Now, they set the start inmate visits up on Monday, and visitors don't even have to be vaccinated or show proof of a negative COVID test. So this cycle is going to begin all over again. And nobody's addressing the issue. And once again, when the union puts out, listen, we have to be careful with how we do X, Y, and Z, we get put up as if it's a wall saying, no, we have this handled. We'll look into it. But nobody's looking into anything. We already lost an inmate to COVID. We lost social worker to COVID. We lost an officer and a supervisor. This isn't a game. And we can blame the pandemic on what's going on inside the prison system. However, it's been going on. Mismanagement has been going on for years. For years. It's just worse now. And I do believe the mayor, if he's involved, he should actually reconsider the entire administration. Ask for the resignations. I wouldn't want to see anybody lose their job, but if you're not capable of doing your job, it's time that somebody step in that's capable of doing it. I agree with Claire when she said someone should step in to be a risk manager, because it needs it. We don't need no more inmate deaths. The assaults are through the roof. And of course, when you're locked in for so long, it messes with your mind. So of course you're going to be disruptive. You're going to want to act out. I had came up with a pilot where RCF can let inmates out, and once they were out for that day, they didn't want to go back in. So that was a situation. And that shouldn't happen, especially when you're getting exactly what you're supposed to have within the confines of the prison. But I understand their frustration being inmates, because they don't know if they'll ever come back out tomorrow or the next day. And then the staff, they're quitting because it's unsafe. They're being assaulted. The women are being assaulted. The men are being assaulted. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. But like I said, there has to be some type of solutions.
Yeah, and if I could just, say one thing about what David just said. There have been 2 riots reported in the last 6 months. We think that there have probably been more, but there have been 2 that have been reported. And they've taken place because incarcerated people have figured out how to, what it's called, pop the locks on the locks in some of the cells. And I want to just say 2 things about that. I was looking at one of the cells where the lock had been popped. And I asked the prison official I was with, this was one of the newer facilities, why is it that these locks had not been popped earlier? This facility is 15 years old. And he said to me, inmates didn't have an incentive to pop them before. Now they're just stuck in their cells for days at a time. Before, you wouldn't want to spend hours figuring out how to pop the lock because you'd get in trouble if you got out. But now you've got nothing to lose. As a result, these slide bolt locks have been placed on the outside of the doors in the facilities where the locks have been tinkered with. And our readings of the regulations are that they are likely in code violation, and we've let the acting commissioner of L&I know. But that was months ago, and we still have yet to get a ruling from the city on if they're in code violation.
This has been a great exchange. I'm going to actually we got one question in, and I'm going to have my prerogative. I'm going to start with the questions. And just so, David, when you're speaking, if you could just speak as loud as you can, because I want to make sure that we're catching everything that you're saying, because you are coming through a little bit muffled.
Okay, my apologies for that.
No problem. Just try to speak a little bit louder. So my question is, it's so you paint a picture of a crisis situation, and Claire, you talked about calling for a crisis manager. It seems to me that on the outside, as someone who pays attention to the news and pays attention to what policymakers and political leaders are saying, they are not conveying that this is a crisis. You're describing a crisis situation, and that where the system is breaking down and every part of it is not working the way it should be, and compared to some other areas. The message of crisis doesn't seem to be getting through to political leaders and to the public, to general readers like me. What could be your strategy to sound this alarm, because it's very clearly a crisis?
Oh, Tom, we have tried everything under the sun. I mean, here at the Prison Society, we have done things that we don't typically do. We've opened letters to every single policymaker. We are meeting with stakeholders. We are speaking to the press. We've been trying to pitch this as a national, the ACLU and the Prison Society have been trying to pitch this as a national story to outlets around the country. We've gotten nowhere. I would love your thoughts. I think the reason why this total governmental made crisis, which can be solvable crisis, which is leading to loss of life and permanent injury, is largely being ignored, I think for two reasons. One is the obvious one, that poor Black people hidden from public view are largely forgotten about if they've been accused of or convicted of a crime. So that's one reason. I mean, it's the same reason why Rush and Franklin founded the society. They recognized that the people that cycle in and out of the criminal legal system were the most forgotten, but they believed that they deserved benevolence. The second reason is a problem that we face in criminal justice all the time, which is there's not one stakeholder that controls the keys. So when I speak to the managing director's office, the district attorney's office, city council, it's all very confusing. And there's always some other stakeholder who's responsible. I have to say the state plays a part in this, which is why Governor Hochul in New York has gotten out in front on Rikers. But if you talk to people at the state, which I do all the time, they'll say, oh, we don't really understand it. This is a city issue. It's complex. It involves a lot of people, which makes it really easy for any government actor not to take leadership and to pull it off to another. I will say there are several actors in city and state government who I believe have blood on their hands and will continue to have blood on their hands as this continues. I don't think any of them have understanding, have actual intellectual understanding that they have blood on their hands, because there's always somebody else who could be responsible.
David, I didn't hear your what exactly you said about Claire's call for a crisis and an intergovernmental crisis manager. Where does the union stand on that? In particular, the AFSCME union, which has some, they have the ear of government leaders. Where do you stand on this, on the union?
Yes, we actually hear government leaders. However, if they're not listening, it doesn't work. And I agree with Claire. Like I said earlier, there should be a crisis manager. There should be somebody overseeing. See, what happened a few years ago during a vote, there was a vote saying, would you like the Philadelphia Department of Prisons to come from under DHS? And it used to be a board of trustees. That board is no longer. So now you have a department that's running rogue and saying, we're going to do whatever we see fit to do. But years ago, there were a board of people who oversee the commissioner and set certain boundaries. Now that's not happening. But there has to be some sort of crisis manager has to step in, because right now it's a problem. It's a catastrophe. Something bad is going to happen. And then that's when the city and the state is going to say, oh, you know what? This has to happen. Or we should have done this. Well, why do we wait? Why wait till something happens to do something right? That's the problem.
Are your brothers and sisters in the labor union movement behind this idea?
Yes. I talk to different union leaders all the time, and they have our backs. But what more? See, even when I know Claire said they stepped out of what they usually do. We done had rallies. We done had several meetings with high-ranking officials in the city. These things weren't happening before. But now there's an eye on the prison, and they know it's a problem. That's all they know it's a problem. It's a problem.
One of the questions in the chat is there anything that the public can do in addition to giving donations to the Pennsylvania Prison Society?
I mean, I think, So I think, Tom, this is a group of really well-informed citizens, civically engaged citizens. And I'm going to guess that most of you didn't know the depths of this crisis before, even though it's been on the front page of the Inquirer. And Channel 6 has done, and Channel 3 have done small stories on it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to really give credit to David's Union for stopping traffic on Market Street in front of the stations to get more coverage. We have a call to action at the Prison Society to call your council person, to call whomever you know. Any contacts that you have that you want to help us have conversations with. And I want to say that, I don't need to say this. Anyway, any conversations you can have bringing attention to this, please do.
Yes.
We have a question in the chat, and it goes to you, Claire. Can you name the officials with blood on their hands?
Listen, I think that everyone who has contributed to who's in the prison right now has some blood on their hands. And, arguably the citizens of Philadelphia for letting this continue, we do too. Again, the gun crisis, the opioid epidemic, those are societal issues that the city could do more to address, but those are societal issues. This is the city's making. This is Mayor Kenny's making. This is the making of everyone in the criminal court. This is the making of everyone involved in probation and parole. This is the governor's making. This is our collective making. We've contributed to this.
You both look around, in addition to the situation right in front of you, you both see what's happening in other parts of the country. Claire, you mentioned Rikers. People who of a certain age will remember Rikers as being notorious. Where are you seeing other places handling this problem better than it's being handled here, including with the political leadership and other places?
Yeah, so this is an issue in a number of big cities. I talked about New York, though in many of them not to the degree of Philadelphia. So St. Louis, Atlanta, New York are all cities whose prisons are understaffed right now, and that's causing problems, not to the degree of Philadelphia. What I want to say about Rikers is that Rikers has been chronically dangerous and mismanaged. The Philadelphia Department of Prisons has not been chronically dangerous and mismanaged. So they're dealing with a chronic problem that has gotten much worse during the pandemic, and we're dealing with a really acute time-limited problem. And what you see there is, I think in part because there's been so much organizing around problems at Rikers for decades, that the governor issued an emergency order suspending a court rule that applies to people on community supervision and automatically let out 120 people from Rikers Island who were there because they were on community supervision and they did something that put them back in. So with a stroke of the pen, 120 people were taken out of harm's way. I don't see Governor Wolf doing anything remotely like that. And I'd say, where else are things happening? So Dauphin County, Harrisburg, is a jail, unlike Philadelphia, that has been chronically mismanaged and has horrific facility conditions, just really awful. And the county commission in Dauphin County has just brought in an external crisis manager to deal with the ongoing problems in Dauphin. They haven't been made so much worse by the pandemic. It was chronic, but their executive leadership in Dauphin County has brought in external crisis management. So if we look to New York, if we look to Harrisburg, we're seeing action. If we look to state systems, so at the height of the pandemic, Most state Department of Corrections were down significantly in staff because staff were out with COVID. And in many states, the National Guard was brought in. Here in Pennsylvania, the state legislature approved a $2 million appropriation to bring in temporary staff to staff the Department of Corrections. That appropriation was never used, but the appropriation was made. I don't believe that's been on the table. Obviously, David's union would oppose to temporary staff being brought in, but that is something that other jurisdictions have done. We haven't done here. I also haven't heard anybody talking about moving people to some of the neighboring counties and state facilities where there are housing units that are empty because the census has gone down during the pandemic. Now, there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to do that, which I will not bore you with, but it's got to be something on the table. People have got to be willing to take unpopular solutions to stop people from dying and being stabbed.
David, from your point of view, and please put more questions in the chat there. Anything you want to ask, but I'm curious more on your point of view. Could you elaborate a little bit on the correctional officer's position on what? Well, I guess it's a question of work conditions. What steps, from your perspective, would help bring in more candidates, more cadets, and keep them on the job? And what role, perhaps, does the local or AFSCME play in making that happen?
Okay, so it's honestly, it's really quite simple, and that comes down to management. Now they have a class of 30 currently right now in the academy, and 30 just graduated last week, on top of another 15 just weeks before. Now, of course, they can hire. The whole thing is about keeping the staff employed, or having them want to actually be employed by the Philadelphia Department of Prisons. And it's the conditions, the working conditions. As I stated earlier, they know what they're getting into being a correctional officer. However, they didn't know the conditions that they'll be working in. And it just comes down to management and working conditions. Because right now, as far as staffing, the city, I will say, they're trying to get these people inside these positions. However, keeping them is the problem. But if you put a lock on the management and fix the working conditions, because you have locks. Listen, when inmates are popping out at ease as if they have keys to their own doors. And I got ousted by the commissioner and her team by saying it's my fault because I made it public how inmates can pop out.
What?
Now,
really?
Yeah. I can go on record. They said it was my fault because I made it public and showed the inmates how to get out of their cells.
You take paper.
And I went, yeah.
You take paper and you jam it in the lock. That's how you do it.
Well, Claire, now it's your fault too.
Exactly.
Right. See, we're all just. A lot can be done, and it doesn't take a lot to do it. You have to fix. This place is broken, completely broken. There's no real true leadership. The staff has lost all confidence in the current leadership. COVID destroyed us, but it's just time to rebuild it. And the city has to take some type of accountability to help rebuild. Because when I first started 16 years ago, I knew I was signing up to work inside of a prison. And then when I actually got the job, the conditions weren't bad. I know it can be day-to-day violence. I know anything can happen at any time. But now, fires are being set, feces is being thrown, inmates are being killed, staff are being assaulted. That's daily. And it has to be addressed. And as far as the public seems, they actually are starting to put it out there more and more. However, I just want to make a few things clear because a lot of people don't understand the everyday duty of a correctional officer. You know, we have officers that, for instance, the juveniles, they call them youthful offenders now. We have officers that, when the pandemic first started and the schools shut down, these officers had to step up, set packets up, teach classes, and turn in homework to make sure that these young men and women actually excelled in their classes. And we graduated numerous juveniles during that program. That program now has fell flat. The current state of the juveniles is they're not getting everything they used to have. We have restorative justice, where an individual that didn't get along with another individual, they either fight every day, or if they were on the street, they probably shoot each other. We can put them in a room and have a session. And at the end of the day, they became almost best friends. And this was happening on a daily basis. Now that program is no more. One, because of staff shortage, and two, because of management. And these are the young men that's going to go back out into the streets. And who knows what's going to happen after that? Because now that your mental isn't right, you're not capable of living a productive lifestyle. And of course, jails, it's a correctional facility. It means it has to correct your actions. Now it seems like we're just a holding place and brewing for something to happen. And Claire stated, those programs that the federal judge handed prisons to do, they're not happening. The inmates coming out 3 hours a day, that's not happening.
It's not happening.
You know, and that's sad, because the correctional officers, the easiest day for a correctional officer is for all the inmates to be out. So we all want the same thing, but we're not getting it. Because now that the inmates are locked in for a long period of time, that's when the revolution starts.
Yeah. We've hit the top of our hour.
Okay.
This has been an eye-opening discussion, and I hope for me it has been. I hope it has been for everybody else. Obviously, we're looking at a situation where this is a crisis in a citizen in a system of our own making and our own control, and this is perhaps a role for letter writing, for taking to the streets. This just isn't being recognized for the crisis it is, and it's important to point that out. All right. Well, Claire, David, thank you very much. It's been great having you. Everyone, this is recorded. It will be posted up on our YouTube channel whenever we get to it. And like I said, keep an eye on your inboxes for our next announcement. And if any of you has more questions for Claire or David, just send a message back to the Philly Policy Gmail email box, and we will get the message to them or connect you with them. Unless Claire or Dave, you want to put your emails out, whatever you want to do.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I'm on audio. I just want to give everybody my email address.
Yep, I'm going to put it in the chat here. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Say it again. It's President
Robinson 159 at gmail.com.
And I just wanted to say, and Tom, you can put this up later, is that, to the person who said, what can we do? I just want to let you know that the Prison Society does most of our work helping incarcerated people and their families through volunteers. And we really believe that people in the public need to go behind bars and see what's happening to affect change. So we're not letting very many volunteers go with us into Philly, but we are always looking for new volunteers, and you can find out about that on our website.
Tell me again the website, and I'm going to type it here too.
Sure, prisonsociety, one word, .org.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And we'll be in touch. Thank you, David. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks.
Thank you all.